Hello everyone, welcome to my talk, UX/Y. My name is Ryan Langley. I'm originally from Adelaide, Australia. I got my start in the game industry from being a QA tester at Chrome Studios Adelaide, working on the PSP versions of Star Wars: The Force Unleashed and Clone Wars Republic Heroes for the Wii. I was lucky enough to become a game designer at Halfbrook Studios in Brisbane, where I was the game designer for Age of Zombies, worked on Fruit Ninja's post-release updates, such as the Deflect Bombs and Berry Blast and a bunch of other UI things, and was the designer on a ton of Jetpack Joyride's features, like Sam, the strong arm machine, and its event systems like the Back to the Future events. For the past 2 years, I've been at Picklock Games in Wellington, where I was the designer on Doomsday Clicker. I was the UI designer for Rival Stars College Football, and was a writer and post-release UI designer for Dungeon Inc. So I'm here to talk to you about UX. So what is UX? Well, UX is the user experience for the player. For us, it's the principles in design to help improve the player's experience in the game. For Picklock Games, this usually means the user interface, but will also mean things like how we define items in games. Why? Well, making any game is reasonably easy nowadays, but making a good game is quite hard, and making someone understand your good game is even harder. For us, we work really hard to try and keep players hanging around in our games and continue playing them, and by making them have more fun. So making sure that they actually understand what's going on is a pretty big part of that. At Picklock, we have a UI/UX designer on board for all projects. We also have a user experience manager who keeps in contact with us all and is a great help to bounce ideas off of and keep track of all our games. We also have a user researcher who will run playtests. We have in our office. We regularly get people from around Wellington into the office and get them to play our games, to see how they react, and use that feedback to improve our game. So when we get players in to check out our games, we have a room set up for it. We have an elaborate webcam setup that's been crafted to not annoy the player. It's sort of like this elaborate thing that's attached to the phone. It allows us to watch them doing it. So during the test, our user researcher will ask questions or hope that the player is quite chatty and talking about what they think everything is. A fun part of this is the team can actually watch while people are playing in the other room. It's streamed out to another screen, so we can comment to ourselves about issues the player is having, or we can write down issues and we'll try to resolve them later. We then use the user researcher will write up a debrief on what occurred, both its good points and the things that they believe we can improve. So we also have this crazy thing called the PPUXA. The PPUXA is the Picklock User Experience Evaluation Rating. This is a giant, massive spreadsheet that our UX guys have made, which goes through every single bit of the game and grades it based on the criteria. The goal of this is to try to hit everything we need to make our games more playable and better all around. A quick grab from here, this was for Doomsday Clicker, which has a current PPUXA rating of 73.6. Some of the points that have been docked are for things like input hitbox touches, where the player can have some issues when trying to do things because they're trying to avoid pressing a button, but the hitbox might be too big for it. Some things, this will also take into account things like 3D touch on newer iPhones. In this case, it's not really relevant to the game, so it just has so it's not sort of counted towards that. It's a great tool and actually gets all the teams to try and be better at making our UX better overall as we try to get a better score than the other games. So for today's talk, I want to talk about 4 tales of UX and UI that I've been involved with at TikTok. How to simplify, how little simple things can be extremely difficult to get right. A look at the design process for a screen that can take a lot of iteration. How in today's post-release update world for games, that can change a lot after a game has actually been released. And how we've tried to make watching ads a fun and engaging experience. So first up is the tale of the multi-buy button. So Doomsday Clicker is a clicker game that we've made at TikTok. Has anyone here played Doomsday Clicker? Awesome, that's way better than last week. Basically, it's a game which you unlock rooms in an underground bunker, upgrade them, and then destroy them regularly to rebuild them again at a faster rate. It's a very popular genre nowadays on phones. So what I want to talk about is this single button, the multi-buy button, top right there. So in the case of Doomsday Clicker, this button was based on its predecessor, a game called Tap It Big. The button itself is a pretty standard trope in clicker games, from adventure capitalist to charming keep. It allows you to buy 1, 10, or 50 rooms at once. You tap it and the number will change from 1 to 10 to 50. You can then purchase 50 of a room instead of 1 if you can afford it, making the game a bit faster to play later in the game. So based on Tap It Big's playtesting, people actually avoided pressing this button at all. The reason why is because it said buy 1x. They thought it would buy something by pressing it, rather than change how many items they'd actually buy. So when implementing this button in Doomsday Clicker, we removed the buy text and just made it a 1 times button. However, this caused another issue. People didn't think it was for purchasing items anymore. People actually thought this might have something to do with time. They thought that by pressing this, it would actually speed up the game. Some other players thought this was a part of the incentivized video multiplier, which used a very similar looking multiplier on the left. So our first step to make this a little easier to understand was to change how we showed the button to the user. Instead of multiplying, we're adding. Add 10 rooms, for example. Maybe that will sort this out. But unfortunately, no. It still doesn't really tell you what it does. Now, people who would now press it, now people would actually press it, not really sure what it did, and the game instantly became much harder because of that. By pressing the button, it meant that all the prices go up, because you were looking at buying 10 times. But if they don't switch back to 1 times early in the game, they're going to be in for a hard time. They're going to have to wait 10 times longer to actually buy anything. So in the next update, we locked the button up until they had completed a bunch of tasks. We had our tutorial character, the monkey, come in and explain what this thing is that we've just now unlocked. And then we let the player learn from this. So it then sort of turns red at the top there so they can get through it. This tended to work really well for new users in the new user flow that we had sort of designed, so that people wouldn't get stuck really early. However, as many of us have learned, no one reads anything. Generally, even people who come to our office and play our games for a JB Hi-Fi voucher can't be bothered to read anything on the screen. So our final addition to Doomsday Clicker was to add the word multi-buy to the top of the button, which will hopefully remind those people who don't read it initially later on. However, this is not the end of this button. A little over a year later, we made a new game, Dungeon Inc. This game is a brand new game using a little bit of the design of Doomsday Clicker as a base, but greatly expanding on it. We would need an upgrade button so that we would try and so we were going to need an upgrade button, so we decided we were going to try and solve some of these issues. Another issue with Doomsday Clicker was that the button, the multi-bar button, was actually visible on every single screen because it was part of the top HUD, the top heads-up display, which meant that it was always active even though it was completely irrelevant to what you actually needed to do on that screen. For this game, we made the upgrade button now part of the bottom of the screen, and it's now part of the dungeon area, so it would only appear when it was actually relevant to the player. In addition, each room button would now have an upgrade bit of text at the top, so it would actually tell you how many you're upgrading. So if you changed it between 1 and 10 and 50, it would actually say if you're now upgrading 1 or 10 or 50. But that wasn't the end of this either. That actually worked pretty well, but in Dungeon Inc., the button allowed for 1 times, 10 times, 50 times, and max upgrades. The issue for us now was that players would still press this once, but then they would never think to change it back from 10 times back to 1 times. So they would still get stuck again. But we also wanted to at least teach them that pressing this button would still do something. It actually does something early on. So at the moment, players would now get stuck waiting for 50 times the amount instead of back to 1. So at the very end of all this, we changed it so that at the very early parts of the game, we allow this button to switch between 1 times and max. This meant that players knew what the button did and they would never get stuck because it's either 1 or 10, 1 or everything, and that's as many as they can do. But after a period of playing, they would then unlock this 10 times and 50 times option silently under the game. So that ends our story of the multi-buy button, or at least what it is so far. Just a single button has gone through numerous iterations across 3 games to finally get to its final destination. That's probably not the end of the story either. So what did I learn? Even the simplest things can be hard to get working right. Don't assume anything's easy to understand, and maybe look at a new perspective when you're testing your users. So my second story is simplifying complexity. Rival Stars College Football is a simplified American football game. Players collect athletes which they put onto their team and go play American football by choosing plays. As we wanted to focus this on an audience that might be into fantasy football, this game is much more stats heavy than most of the other games. So let's have a look at the athlete. They have a face, they have a name, they have a position, like quarterback or running back. They have a level, they have a star rating, which determines how high their level can be. They have some nice bonus information about them, like height and weight. They have a duplicate count, which you need to then level them up. They have 4 basic stats: inside run, outside run, short pass, and long pass. They have dream, which is kind of like a little achievement for a character. And they can have up to 2 skills. That's a lot of information. How the hell am I going to get you guys to figure out why you would choose this guy over another guy? So initially, on this screen, we decided to look at ways of comparing athletes. This is all just Photoshop work, nothing in-game yet. We're limiting it to 1 type, like the quarterback, while also letting the user know about a small amount of stats. Here I started looking at comparing as many athletes as possible on the screen, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that the information we needed was not the athletes, but the actual statistics, the passes and the runs. In this case, having as many on the screen doesn't actually allow me to check all the SPs at once, because the SP, or the short pass stat, is everywhere. There's no one line to actually check to make sure that's actually the one I want. So we switched to a more long-form way of looking at athletes so that you can specifically check their stats against each other. You can check their level, stats, and whether they have a skill or not, which is important when you're choosing them. The second image is messing around with some of the parts to make it a bit easier to read. Then I realized you actually need to compare against the selected character, which is what the third one is. and allowed you to upgrade and select them as well, which meant that buttons need to be added. The next example was looking at making the buttons nice and big for users to press, but realised that doing this way on the left makes it really hard to tell which athlete you're using or training. When you press the use button or the train button, are you pressing it for the one above or the one below? This makes it just extremely hard to figure out. The final image on my end brought those buttons to be along one side, so keeping all the stats together. The main issue with this one is that the buttons are all on the left side, which most users are more likely to be right-handed, so they probably want to use their right hand for them. As well as the portrait image for the athletes is pretty squished, which is not very nice when you're trying to probably get like half their head in at that point. So from that point, it was time to throw it over to the artist to make this thing look a whole lot prettier. In this instance, we're getting to get the gold and blue color scheme into the game. But the issue with this iteration is that the skills, shown as A and P, are really hidden away. You wouldn't know what skill they have, you just know that they have them. But actually knowing what type of skill they have is quite important when choosing your player. So we brought back the skills a bit more and started messing with the position of the level up buttons. We gave the character a bit more style and flair compared to the original bits, and made the currently selected athlete have a bit more flair as well at the top. Further iteration brought us to continuing to mess with the positions of the level up and select buttons. Here they are separated on the top and bottom of each character, but this also, again, made it hard to determine which button was positioned for who, since the select and level up buttons could be quite close to each other, but be for completely different characters. We also had sorted out our button style guide at this point, leading to the green call to action button that for when we want players to actually go do something. We also realised that we need the ability to change the order of the players as well. So we added a button in on the top right, the left of the top of the right button there, screen. Finally, we started adding the actual models of the players into the game and got that all hooked up. We had brought the buttons down to the bottom of each player so that everything interactable was in one place for the character, but still within their frame. We gave the player a bit more of a pictorial frame and made each character's background change depending on how leveled up they were or like what rarity they were. Lastly, we added the duplicate count directly onto the icon. We initially thought this would be easy to understand without it, but as you could only level up when you had enough athletes, but that proved wrong in our playtesting. So just having the knowledge of how many you had was quite important for everyone. Until finally we had the final few iterations on this screen. We made the selected player the starter with a slightly different visual, and we finally changed the P and A, which was the passive and active buttons, to be something the user is into just little lightning icons, which is something that a normal player would understand rather than a game design. So here's a quick comparison of the beginning, middle, and end. Suffice to say, I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to make this easy to compare between athlete stats and keep things as simple as possible. Is there still more to do? Absolutely. One of the issues we still face, which is a bit poor on our part, is the use of greens and reds for a lot of these stat comparisons. Fine for most players, but those who are red-green colourblind are going to have a bit of a hard time. We've actually changed this in some of our other stats on other screens with up and down arrows, so we might see this change up a little later as well. So what did I learn? You will never get it right the first time, and if you do, you're better than me. That's for sure. And you need to iterate to find the right UI for the right user. If you're aiming for a stat-heavy player, make sure that those that are even mid-level can still enjoy your game. My third story is about design always being in flux. I mentioned it before, but Dungeon Inc. is our semi-sequel to Doomsday Clicker. You build rooms in dungeons, but you can set up defenses against incoming enemies. And you can also fight against each other in other players' dungeons in the PvP, or player versus player mode. So the original design for the PvP was that you could attack other players' dungeons, but also defend against them as well. When you do either, you'll earn a different key, a defense key or an attack key, to help go towards unlocking a defense chest or an attack chest. At the end of a 3 or 4 day tournament, you'll get a prize depending on where you were on this leaderboard. The image on the side here was basically the design from the game's UI designer Lucy, and we basically did everything we needed it to do. We didn't have a lot of time to iterate at this point. For Dungeon Inc. 1.0, this basically went in pretty close to how we designed it. And for what it was, it worked well. You had the 2 chests, easy way to start raiding, with a big green button. There's a leaderboard, it's all kind of there. But we did have some post-release issues, mainly on the design side. Players didn't understand the 2 chests. You didn't get attacked very often, so the defense chest was kind of bizarre. You could actually just never actually open it because you'd never get enough attack keys to actually unlock the thing. You didn't actually set up a defense dungeon in the game. We defined your best dungeon in the game as the one that was attacked, but we never properly explained what that was or which one it was or anything like that. This screen was also feeling a little cluttered and didn't have much personality compared to the rest of the game. And the emphasis on the leaderboard was a little much. You'll never get to the top unless you're playing a lot, so it might put off some people who are just there to have some fun rather than being the #1 person. So here are some early looks at a redesign for this screen. In this case, I took over for Lucy as she had moved on to a new project. Initially, we moved the ladder to its own screen so that we could focus on the player's position specifically on here, as well as their pay grade or their what sort of chest they would get in terms of the result. We made it so you could open up each chest with the keys that you earned, rather than making you unlock the chest automatically. So you could earn lots of keys over multiple tournaments in order to unlock them. We also tried adding a little bit of personality to the screen with a character on it, trying to give you hints, or we also tried looking at making them look like rooms, like the main game, so like a different sort of dungeon, which is where the chests would exist. But by the time we got to the right one, we also wanted to add in the setup defense as well, so we added the ability to set up a defense. I then looked at mixing the 2 together again, having a unique character in the room, the 2 chests, and the defense setup. But this is still looking utterly complicated. There are a million things to look at on both of these versions of the screen. On the left one, there are 5 different instances of keys on that screen, and that's a bloody nightmare. Which one are you meant to focus on? Which one, how to tell which one is which? There's just too much going on here. At this point, we also started to discuss new items in the games, traps and spells. These would be unique items in the game that we wanted to add that would only be available to the player versus player mode, in the hope that people would come and play that mode a bit more. This also meant that we wanted to add a mini store to the PvP screen so that the one-screen approach now was just not really going to work. So at this point, we also decided that having the two chests is just too weird and complicated now. We've merged them two into one. There's just one chest now, and it will upgrade during a tournament with each purchase, so people knew exactly what was going on. We also added a rating level, which would upgrade after you rated, which is at the top left and top right of these screens. Lastly, we also added a limitation to how many keys you could get from rating based on the timer, which you can see in the bottom right of the right screen there. So instead of limiting you to a chest that you can get, there is now a timer. On the left, I tried to add the chest into the key store, but again, this just became confusing as it works on a completely different timer to the rest of it, so it just wasn't really going to work. I then moved it into its own space on the right. Trying to keep the whole UI on the one screen was also not working out anymore, so we were putting too much into a cramped spot, so we expanded this into a scrollable screen where a bit of that UI was still visible. At this point, we had again lost focus on the screen. What we want you to really do is actually just go raid. But the button for the raid party is now really small. It's as important as a lot of the other buttons on that screen, when it's really the most important thing. So we decided to really highlight that attack button again, limiting the defense setup to be just a small button, since you're not really going to do it that often, and add back in some personality to the attack area with some goblins that we've got in the game. Finally, we seem to make something that would make it easy to understand, in which we gave that to our amazing artists who brought it back to life. To the screen we have now, which is the one on the right. It's really easy to see what you need to do. It's easy to understand the key system. You can see a bit more of the mini store at the bottom, and it's got personality with these new goblins that's sort of animated all the time. Hooray! So, learnings. Games don't end now, especially on the mobile space, so the design doesn't end. Keep iterating until you solve the problem. Don't try to hit a square peg into a round hole. If it's not working, don't be afraid to start all over again. You'll spot every single issue if you do that, which is good. You just have to stand back a bit and think about the requirements that you actually are, what you're actually trying to solve. And so lastly, incentivize video. So the last thing I want to chat about is something we've done across all these games, which is incentivize video, or IVIs. You're probably familiar with the concept. Watch a video and you get a reward for it. You've probably seen this Final Fantasy or Game of War thing a million times by now. But even though you might see these things, we want the experience of actually wanting to watch a video to be and getting a reward for it to be fun. This for me is a big UX issue that I've been a big proponent for, because I want these things to actually be fun and people wanting to actually watch these. Hopefully we can then earn a little bit of money from them if they want to do it. So I want to go through these three games that I've gone through today and quickly show some of the ways we've tried to make this fun and had it work. For Doomsday Clicker, we have a couple of ways we want players to watch a video. There's a Supercharger which players can go to every couple of hours, which will increase the amount of money per second they'll be getting by 2, 3, or 4 times for about 2 hours. This is a huge boost and really worth doing. You'd be silly not to do it. It's quite fun. It has, when you actually have the Supercharger spin around, it's got a lot of animation, it has a little song at the end, and you get a thing, all that sort of stuff. So it's really fun to actually watch it happen and doing it. The second one is our little character, Bleep Blorp, who will appear in the game every couple of hours. Lastly, Dungeon Inc. This actually uses the same styles of items as Doomsday Clicker, but we've enhanced them a lot. The Supercharger now returns, but it's got a lot more character now. We've got Chaz here, who will spin the wheel, the motivation, wheel of motivation, which will motivate all your goblins to do things. It's got a little, it feels like, just like a bit of a game show type thing. And all it is just doing the same thing basically, but it just feels good to do this ad, and you go, oh, okay, yeah. You'll get that sort of feeling of satisfaction afterwards. For the Hypercharge, which was the original with Bleak Ball, instead of having one option, we now actually have multiple options that can occur at this time. So when you press that, when you go and press that character to get it, that you can boost damage in an order, you could boost the production speed. So there's multiple different things that the player could do depending on where they are right now in the game. This gives the player the option to choose their reasoning for watching a video, which means that they actually make a choice, and which increases their interaction with it, and hopefully whatever they get in return is the thing that they wanted, and they'll have more fun with this. So learnings, give players a reason to interact with the ads and reward them. Don't be stingy, otherwise they won't see a reason to do it. It's worth it just to sort of give players more things than they actually than what it's worth, because it just feels like a bargain to them, and they're more likely to actually come and watch the videos. And also trying to make it fun or as unique as possible so that they feel good doing it. So I hope you've enjoyed this talk, going through some of the processes of making games at Pickpop. There's a lot of interaction and a lot of back and forth, but this process has been great for us to make some really good games and allowed us to make, and just make them far more cooler than I would hope. So, thank you. How much time have we got?
You have 5 minutes.
Cool. Any questions? Yes.
So it seems like at Pickpop you guys go through a lot of prototyping for your UI and stuff. So let's just say, for example, you're a small team, and there's maybe limited QA, for example, and you said there are two opinions, like from a UI artist and a UX designer about a certain thing. How much of your decision going on is determined by the data for QA, or like gut feeling or opinion from different people?
A lot of it initially would be sort of gut feeling, and has been just from learning from people doing this. When you've got games like one of the best things, especially for a small indie team, is to just go around to hang around like a school or a uni or something like that, and try to get people to play the game that you've got and see how they're interacting. And you can actually go, if you go do that, you'll instantly see like some of the issues that people are trying to actually understand the game. Like we do try to get people in, we do have our JV hi-fi vouchers and all that sort of stuff, but doing that is just as useful. When I was back at Heartbreak, we would just hang out. There was a bus stop near the school that we had that was right next to our office, and so we just go there and just get some kids to play it and see what they thought. In terms of that, if you've got some initial ideas of the UI, you can probably do them in like really simple ways first, and then test them out, and then see if there actually needs to be any iteration on it. Yes?
With the incentivized ads, from your guys' experience using them, do you find that the advertisers that actually use them, do they prefer to have ads that kind of, the normal ones that are always there and kind of interfere with people's gameplay, or do they prefer to have ones that people are actively choosing to interact with?
I think the ones where I think the advertisers aren't too worried about it themselves. They probably, if anything, they seem to be more into ones that are interactable in their end, which is why you see the Fire Age and all those sorts of ones as well so much. But as in terms of the user experience, I feel that the incentivized ones where people actually actively do it feel so much better. Because people go, yes, I will watch an ad for this reward, and I will do that. While if you get, just like you're playing the game and suddenly there's a video ad, it just doesn't feel very nice to the player. And for us, we're looking at trying to enhance our. We're trying to get people to hang around in our game for a long time. So, and in theory, like, you know, if they're playing our games for 30 days, then they watch plenty of ads. And so that's our goal. Because, and hopefully they're still having fun doing it. Or if we blast them with ads straight away, without them with this being confused by it, then they may not interact with it as much, and they may not hang around nearly as often. So, yes.
So you introduced like the ad watching at the end when people just won. Do you have some data that shows that people click more often?
Maybe, I'm not sure. We do have that. We do have those stats, but it's been a while since I've looked at rifle sales as well. But there are. I mean, that's where like some things can be interesting. We've done ones, say for Into the Dead, for example, where you can watch videos to get all the perks at the beginning of the game rather than the end. And sometimes that will work as well. It just really depends on the actual game you've sort of got. Because at the end of a level, people should be hopefully a bit happier because they won. Like we won't show it to you if you've lost, even though you'll get like some rewards there because that would be a bad experience to watch an ad after you've lost as well. So try to figure out the right time, the best time to actually do that sort of thing.
I guess you can argue in both ways. You can say, well, I just lost, now I need more features, now I need more tools, now I watch them.
Yes, I mean, there is that as well, but yeah, not sure. Yes?
What methods are you using to identify problems where users get stuck in certain modes or things that they might not necessarily report on?
So that's why we try to get people in, basically to actually see where they're going. We also have, we have our, what we call the new user flow funnels that we'll set up. So lots of little analytics in the game that goes, okay, they hit this point, they hit this point, they hit this point, they hit this point. Initially in Doomsday Clicker, we didn't actually do a really good job with it because you could actually do a bunch of different options in different orders. So it was kind of a bit messy, but with Dungeon Inc. we made it so that you could hit this and hit this and hit this and hit this. And with that, you can see just how many times, if they only got to this point and they just dropped off. If there's like a 20% drop off of people who've never got to this point, there's probably some issue there. They're not getting to it. Sometimes it's just not even an issue of that. Like in Dungeon Inc. we've had it so that the issue we've actually got now is that we're watching people play it, but they're not actually really understanding why they're upgrading rooms. They're not actually going down and upgrading and unlocking new rooms even in our playtests. They'll just keep upgrading the first one, but the things to unlock requires you to go further down in order for you to actually play it. So we're hopefully going to change some of the dialogue in the game to make it more understanding as to yes, you need to go down further, or in Dungeon Inc.'s case as well, if you've only unlocked the first room and you keep upgrading that first room, we will force you to, if you've done it like 30 times or something, we'll just go, all right, fine. We let you be alone for a bit. You have to unlock this room now, just so that we can get along with the game a bit more. So. Yep.
Do you find yourself having to compromise between UI element being consistent across the game and being perfect for a very specific situation? And how do
we try to, we always have, there's always a back and forth between the UI, the initial UI design and the art design of it as well. We try to keep it as consistent as possible, but that sometimes will not allow for a lot of flavour and personality into it as well. So we try to find ways to bring both in. And I've personally tried to work directly with the concept artists to give them some insight on some of this stuff and why things are like the way we're trying to do it, which generally has helped a lot in terms of getting some personality, but also actually getting the things that we want done.